He named her his, and the word travelled like frost through glass. Hairline, silent, splitting everything it touched. She let it. Somewhere in that house, a boy learned that holding still can be an act of love. We begin here. The peacocks had stopped crying 3 days ago. Draco noticed things like that now, the small subtractions, the absences that no one else bothered to mark. The white birds had walked the yew hedges of Malfoy Manor for as long as he had been alive, screaming their ugly, ornamental screams into the dusk. And then one evening, they simply hadn't, and no one had said a word about it. And that was how you knew what the house had become. Things left. Things were taken. No one commented. He stood at the long window of the drawing room with his hands behind his back and watched the rain come sideways across the lawn, silver in the last of the light, flattening the topiary into shapeless grey animals. Behind him, the table was being laid. He could hear the small, apologetic clink of silver against porcelain, the elf's shallow breathing, the scrape of a chair adjusted by half an inch and then adjusted back. The room smelled of beeswax and tarnish, and the cold ash of a fire nobody had bothered to light. 22 places. He had counted them twice without meaning to. His mother came in at 7 and stood beside him, not touching him, her reflection surfacing in the black glass at his shoulder like something rising through water. Narcissa Malfoy had learned to move through her own house the way a guest moves through a stranger's, carefully, apologetically, touching nothing. "You will sit at his left," she said. "I know where I sit. You will keep your hands above the table." He looked at her reflection. She was watching the rain, or pretending to. There was a fine tremor in the pearl at her throat, the kind you would only catch if you had spent 17 years learning to read her. "Why?" "Because he watches hands," she said. "Not faces. Faces lie well. Hands are stupid." The doors opened at past. They came in the order they always came in. The heavy ones first, Yaxley and Roll with their wet cloaks steaming. Then Lucius, who had begun to walk as though the floor might not hold him. Then Bellatrix, laughing at something no one had said. She kissed the air beside Draco's cheek and left the smell of damp wool and iron behind her. "Little nephew," she said, "you look ill." "I look bored, Aunt." Her eyes were bright and wet and hungry. "There is a treat tonight. You'll want to be awake for it." He did not ask. That was the first rule of the house. Never ask, because asking told them the answer mattered to you, and anything that mattered to you was a handle by which you could be lifted and moved. Then the room went quiet in the way rooms had learned to go quiet, all at once, like a held breath. And the Dark Lord came in through the far doors, and everyone stood. Draco had grown very skilled at looking without seeing. He fixed his gaze on the empty air a foot to the left of that pale, ruined face, and held it there while the chairs scraped and settled, while wine was poured that no one would drink, while Nagini poured herself along the length of the table like slow water, and laid her head near the candelabra where the heat was. "Sit," said Voldemort. They sat. "We are one short," he said pleasantly. "Bellatrix, fetch our guest." And Draco, who had learned to feel nothing in this room, who had made an art of the flat white silence behind his eyes, felt the floor of his stomach go out from under him. Because he had known somehow from the moment the peacock stopped. Because the house had been holding its breath for 3 days, and this was the exhale. He heard the doors. He heard footsteps, 2 sets, 1 light and 1 uneven. And he did not turn his head, would not give them that, kept his eyes on the tarnished bowl of fruit at the table's centre, where a pear had begun to soften and darken on one side. She came in on her own feet. That was the first wrongness. He had prepared himself, in the numb, thorough way he prepared for everything now, for a body dragged, for blood in the hair, for the particular boneless posture of someone who had been broken open in the cellars and put back together badly. He had rehearsed his own face for that. He had not rehearsed this. Hermione Granger walked the length of Malfoy Manor's dining room with her chin level and her hands loose at her sides, and she was wearing green, dark green, high at the throat, the sleeves narrow, a dress that had been made for a woman with 3 inches more height and none of her hunger. Her hair had been washed. Someone had washed her hair. The thought arrived in Draco's mind with the sound of glass cracking under a heel. There was no rope on her wrists, no wand at her back. Bellatrix walked behind her with the loose, delighted swagger of a woman showing off a purchase. They had set a chair for her at the Dark Lord's right hand. Draco's signet ring bit into the knuckle of his middle finger. He had turned it, without deciding to, so that the silver crest pressed inward, and he pressed harder, and the small, clean pane was something to hold on to, something that belonged to him, and he kept his hands above the table because his mother had told him to, and because he could not have moved them now if the house had come down. The girl sat. She did it without hesitation, without looking at the chair first, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she raised her eyes and looked around the table at 21 Death Eaters as though she were counting them. Her gaze went over Draco without stopping. Not a flicker. Not the smallest hitch of recognition. Something behind his ribs turned over and lay still. "You are all wondering," said Voldemort, "why she is not dead." Nobody spoke. The rain worked at the windows. "Some of you are wondering it loudly." His eyes moved down the table, over Yaxley, over Roll, over Lucius, who was studying his own untouched plate. "Bellatrix asked me for her. Bellatrix has asked me for her 4 times. Bellatrix, you may tell them what I said." Bellatrix's smile faltered at its edges. "You said no, my lord." "I said no." He reached out and laid one long white hand over Hermione Granger's folded ones on the table in front of everyone. It was almost gentle. That was the obscenity of it, that it was almost gentle. "Because she is mine." Draco heard very distinctly the whisper that went through the room. He heard Raoul's chuckle, low and thick, and someone's fork touch a plate, and behind all of it, the enormous roaring silence in his own skull. "You will not touch her," Voldemort continued conversational. "You will not question her. You will not lay so much as an unkind word against her. She has the freedom of this house. She is not a prisoner." A pause, exquisitely placed. "She is my mistress, and she came to me willingly." Liar. The word rose in Draco with such violence that for one appalling second he thought he had said it aloud. He sat with it burning in his throat, and he did not move, and he did not breathe, and the ring cut deeper into his knuckle. Because it was a lie. Of course it was a lie. The man had no appetite for that, had nothing left in him that could want a woman, and every person at this table knew it, and it did not matter in the least. That was not the point. Draco understood the point with the terrible clarity of someone who had been raised on this exact cruelty. The truth was irrelevant. The sentence was the weapon. It would leave this house tonight in 21 mouths. It would be in Diagon Alley by morning, and in the Order's safe houses by nightfall, and there was not one person alive who could disprove it, least of all her. He had known Voldemort to kill people. He had watched it. He had watched it and gone on breathing. He had never before watched him do this, take someone whole and undamaged, and simply unmake what she was in the eyes of everyone who had ever loved her. And under all of it, under the horror and the rage and the sick, lurching pity, there was a smaller, worse thing. And Draco recognized it, and hated himself for the recognition. He had said it while looking at me. Not at the table, not at Bellatrix. At the moment, the word mistress had left that mouth. Those red eyes had been resting, mild and patient and unhurried, on Draco Malfoy's face. He knows. The thought did not arrive as a shock. It arrived the way water arrives in a boat that has been taking it on for months. The sudden understanding that you are already, and have been for some time, sinking. The meal went on. Someone laughed. Wine was drunk. Nagini shifted her weight, and the candles guttered and threw the room into a brief drowning amber. And Draco cut a piece of meat he had no intention of eating, and moved it 2 inches to the left of his plate. And then, in the 7th or 8th minute of that endless dinner, she looked at him. It lasted less than the space of a heartbeat. Her chin did not turn. Only her eyes moved, sliding along the table's edge and up, and they caught his and held, and there was no plea in them. That was what stopped the breath in his chest. He had braced for terror, and what he found instead was something steady and cold and deliberate. A look with a spine in it. A look that said, "Don't." A look that was giving him an instruction he had no possible way to read. Then her lashes lowered, and she reached, unhurried, for her water glass. And the moment was gone, as though it had never been. Draco sat very straight in his chair with his hands above the table, and the ring bit, and the rain came sideways across the ruined garden, and he understood with absolute certainty that he was going to lose his mind slowly over a period of weeks in this house, in front of everyone, and that the man at the head of the table had planned it that way and was enjoying his soup. Under the tablecloth, out of sight, his heel came off the floor and began, very slightly, to tremble. The house did not sleep. It never had, not properly, but in the weeks that followed, it developed a particular kind of insomnia. Doors that opened onto empty corridors, footsteps in the west wing where nobody was quartered, the long, low hiss of the snake moving through rooms she had no business in. Draco lay in his childhood bed with his eyes open and listened to Malfoy Manor breathing around him like something with an illness. She had been given the blue room. He had learned this on the 2nd morning, not because anyone told him, but because he had watched an elf carry towels up the east stair and had followed the direction of the towels the way a man follows smoke. The blue room. 3 doors from his mother's, 4 from his own. A guest room, a good one, with a fire lit in it and windows facing the orchard, and no lock on the outside of the door, because a mistress does not require a lock. And that was the entire cruelty of the arrangement, packed into a strip of bare wood where a bolt should have been. walk out. That was the thing. She could walk down that corridor and down the stairs and out through the great doors into the wet gravel drive, and nobody would stop her, and she would get perhaps 90 feet before the wards took her apart. Freedom offered in the certain knowledge that it could not be used. He knew that trick. He had grown up inside it. He did not go to the blue room. He arranged his days around not going to the blue room with the elaborate care of a man arranging furniture around a hole in the floor. On the 5th day, he failed. It was the west corridor near the library, at the hour of the afternoon when the light came through the tall windows, the colour of weak tea, and lay in long bars across the runner. He turned the corner too fast, thinking about nothing, and she was there. She had a book under her arm and another in her hands, and she was walking with her head down, reading as she went, and the impact was small and stupid and physical. His shoulder against hers, a jarring shove of bone through wool, and the book went out of her hands and struck the floorboards spine first with a sound like a dropped plank. They both stopped. For a moment, neither of them moved at all. He could hear his own pulse in his ears. He could see the fine mist of dust that the book had knocked loose from the runner, drifting up through a bar of tea-coloured light, and her hand still half raised where the weight had been taken from it, and the pale inside of her wrist where the sleeve had ridden back. There was a word carved into her forearm. He knew that. Everyone knew that. The sleeve had not ridden back far enough to show it, and he found that he had been looking anyway, and he made himself stop. He bent and picked up the book. It was old. The boards worn to felt at the corners, the pages that particular parchment yellow that comes with 2 centuries of dry air, and it smelled the way the library at Hogwarts had smelled on winter afternoons. That dry, sweet dustiness he had not thought about in a year and a half, and did not want to think about now. 900 charms of confinement. He turned it over. There was no dust on the spine at all. He held it out. Granger, don't. Her voice was low and quick and utterly flat, and she did not reach for the book. It's your... Don't speak to me. She looked up then, and her eyes were dry and hard, and there was something working behind them that he could not name. Not here. Not in the corridors. Not anywhere in this house. Do you understand me? Something in his chest closed like a fist. You dropped your book. Then put it on the floor. For God's sake, put it on the floor, Malfoy. The words came out of her with a strange, strained urgency, and her eyes moved. One flick, fast as a bird, to the left and up over his shoulder, toward the long gallery where the portraits hung, and where a stretch of shadow between 2 windows made a natural blind spot for a man who wanted to stand and listen. He did not turn his head. He had been raised in this house. He knew better than to turn his head. He bent slowly and set the book down on the runner between them. There, he said, and his voice came out wrong, thin and scraped. Your book. Thank you. She said it like a slap. Now get out of my way. He stepped aside. She retrieved it herself, one smooth motion, and walked past him without her sleeves so much as brushing his. And the corridor swallowed the sound of her footsteps in 6 paces, because the runner was thick and old, and ate every noise it was given. Draco stood in the empty passage, with the dust still settling through the light. She looked at the gallery. He turned it over and over on the way back to his rooms, and through dinner and through the long acid hours of the night. She looked at the gallery before she told me to go. Not after. Before. She had checked the shadows, and then she had made herself cruel, at volume, in a corridor where the acoustics carried. And there was a version of this in which that meant nothing at all, in which she simply loathed him, which she had every right on earth to do, and had been curt because curtness was all she had left. And there was another version. He did not let himself hold that one for long. Hope in this house was a fatal illness. He had watched it kill better men than himself, but he had seen the book. 900 charms of confinement, no dust on the spine. Someone had been taking it down and putting it back repeatedly for days. The second week, the whispering started properly. It came up from the lower floors the way damp comes up a wall. He heard Rolls say it first, in the gun room, to a man whose name Draco had never bothered to learn. Said it with a wet laugh and a movement of the hand that made Draco's vision go briefly and dangerously white at the edges. He heard Selwyn's wife say it more delicately at a card table, with a small, dry smile, the way one might remark on a marriage of convenience. He heard an elf repeat a fragment of it in the passage behind the kitchens, and then strike itself hard across the face with a copper ladle for having done so. The word travelled. It travelled exactly as it had been designed to travel, and she walked through it. That was the part he could not get past. She took her meals at that table, at that right-hand chair, 3 or 4 nights a week when she was summoned, and she ate, actually ate, unlike Draco, who had lost half a stone since Easter, and she answered when she was spoken to in a level, unhurried voice, and she let Bellatrix look at her the way a cat looks at something behind glass, and not once in 14 days did her hands shake. Draco watched the hands. His mother had been right about hands. Hermione Granger's were the steadiest in the room. He began to find it unbearable, and then he began to find the unbearableness itself suspicious, and then he stopped sleeping altogether. On the 16th night, he was in the library at 2 in the morning, because his bed had become a place where he lay and catalogued his own uselessness, and the library at least had a fire. He heard the door. He was in the deep alcove by the north window, in the wing chair with its back to the room, and he did not move, and someone came in with a candle and crossed to the shelves on the west wall, and there was the sound of a book coming down and pages turning, quick, practiced, a reader who knew what she was looking for. He should have announced himself. There was still, buried somewhere under 18 months of what he had become, some rag of the boy who had been taught manners. He sat with his hands gripping the arms of the chair and did not make a sound. She was there for 11 minutes. He counted them off in the ticking of the long case clock. Toward the end, she stopped turning pages, and there was a long stretch of nothing at all, no movement, no rustle. And then he heard her breathe in, sharply, once, the way you breathe when you have been holding it too long without noticing. And then, so quietly that he was not certain afterwards that he had heard it at all, a small, wretched, half-swallowed sound, one only, immediately bitten off. The candle moved, the door opened and shut. Draco sat in the dark for a long while after she had gone. The fire had burnt down to a red core. His hands hurt, and he unpeeled them from the chair arms one finger at a time and found 4 crescents pressed white into each palm. Then he got up and went to the west wall and looked to see which shelf. It was the third from the top, the section on the theory of magical anchorage, and there was a gap in the row where a volume had gone back in a hurry and sat proud of its neighbours by half an inch. He drew it out. Warding structures. Foundation stones. The binding of a house to a bloodline. He put it back exactly as he had found it, proud by half an inch, because if she noticed it had been straightened, she would know someone had come after her. He went up the stairs. At the head of the east corridor, he stopped, because the door of the blue room was 6 paces away, and there was a line of firelight underneath it, and she was awake in there, and he stood in the dark with his heart going like something trapped under floorboards. Say her name. Knock. 1 word. He did not knock. He turned and walked back to his own room in stockinged feet, and he lay down in his clothes, and toward dawn he finally understood what had been wrong with the whole fortnight, what had been sitting just under his skin since the corridor and the dropped book and the flick of her eyes toward the shadows. She was not surviving this house. She was reading it. The letters came to the manor now. That was one of the small administrative horrors of the war's late season. The ministry had fallen so quietly and so completely that the owls simply changed their habits. Correspondence intended for the Order of the Phoenix, intercepted at the sorting house in Diagon Alley, arrived at Malfoy Manor in canvas sacks twice a week, and was emptied onto the billiard table in the smoking room, and men who could not spell went through it looking for names. Draco had been given the task in June. It was, his father had explained without meeting his eyes, an honour. He sat at the billiard table on a Tuesday afternoon with the green baize under his forearms and the rain going at the windows, sorting other people's lives into piles. Most of it was nothing. Coded nonsense about garden vegetables, a great deal of it. The Order's tradesmen's ciphers so laboured that reading them was like watching a child hide behind a curtain with its feet showing. He worked through it with a flat, mechanical thoroughness. He had discovered that if he did not think at all, the hours passed. Then his hands found a letter that had not been sent. He understood the distinction at once, because the seal was unbroken and the direction had been crossed out. Not smudged, not blotted, but crossed through with 3 hard strokes of a quill that had bitten into the paper. Someone had written it and addressed it, and then changed their mind, and the owl had taken it anyway, because owls are stupid about intention. Hermione. That was all. 1 word in a fast, slanting hand he did not recognize, and then the 3 lines through it. He should have put it on the pile. He put it in his sleeve. He read it that night in the alcove by the north window with the fire low. I've written this 6 times and burned 5. I keep telling them it isn't true. I said it in front of everybody at the meeting on Thursday, and Bill wouldn't look at me, and Mum went out of the room. They say things like, "We don't know what he did to her," but that isn't what they mean, and everyone knows it isn't what they mean, and Kingsley has taken your name off the Holyhead list because he says the list can only carry people whose position is certain. Position. That's the word he used. I'm supposed to hate you now. I've been told there are 3 or 4 ways this could be true, and only one of them is the kind where you're still ours. And I keep saying so, and every time I say it, the room gets quieter. Harry hasn't said one word against you. Not one. But he doesn't say your name anymore either. He says, she. Do you know how that sounds? 6 years, and now you're she. I don't believe it. I want you to know that. I don't believe it, and I'm going to keep not believing it, and if it turns out I'm wrong, I don't think I'll ever. The sentence stopped there. Below it, after a gap of 2 inches, in the same hand but pressed much harder. Come home, whatever it costs. Just come home, and we'll sort out the rest afterwards. G. Draco read it 4 times. Then he sat quite still with the paper in both hands and looked into the fire, and something took hold of him below the sternum and squeezed, methodically, the way a hand closes on wet cloth. He had thought, insofar as he had allowed himself to think about it at all, that the whisper was a humiliation, a stain, something she would have to scrub at for years after the war and never quite get out. He had not understood that it was a subtraction, that it worked backwards through time, undoing things already done, so that 6 years of a girl's life could be quietly reclassified by a room going quiet. Position. He thought of Potter, who had walked into a mountain troll for her, saying she. The Dark Lord had not needed to hurt her at all. He had simply removed her from the list of people who could be hurt on her behalf. He carried the letter for 3 days. He told himself it was evidence. He told himself he was deciding what to do with it, weighing risks, being sensible, and all the while it sat folded against his forearm inside his sleeve, and he could feel the edge of it whenever he moved. And the truth, which he did not look at directly, was that it was the only object in Malfoy Manor that connected her to anyone who loved her. He could give it to her. That was one thing he could do, actually do, with his hands, without magic, without permission. He turned it over at night, the blue room, the 6 paces, the line of light under the door. And then what? She reads that Weasley's mother left the room. She reads that Potter says she. And she is alone in this house with it, and she has nowhere to put it, and there is nothing whatever she can do. He was still turning it over on the Friday when Bellatrix caught him in the long gallery. Nephew. She came out of the shadow between the windows, that shadow, the one Granger had checked, with her wand held loosely and her head tipped like a bird's. You're thin. I'm growing. You're watching. She said it fondly, which was worse than any other way she could have said it. I've noticed. I do notice things, Draco. It's my one talent. You watch the little mudblood the way a dog watches a door. His hands did not move. He had been trained by professionals. His hands did not move. I look at her, he said, the way you look at a dead rat on the drive. It's in my house. I resent it. Bellatrix laughed, delighted, and reached up and patted his cheek with 2 cold fingers. Liar, she said, but a decent one. You've improved. She let the hand fall. Shall I tell you something, since we're being family? He hasn't touched her, not once, not a finger. Her mouth twisted. For a moment there was something almost like hurt in it, the hurt of a woman who had offered everything and been given a lesser task. There's no pleasure in it for him. I asked. Do you know what he said to me? He said, pleasure isn't the instrument. The gallery was very cold, Somewhere below them, a door closed. "Then what is she for?" Draco said. "For?" Bellatrix's eyes came up and fixed on him, black and shining, and completely without a flaw. "Darling, she's for watching. Everyone's watching her. Her friends are watching her. That funny fat one at the sorting house is watching her. And every single person who watches her comes away a little bit worse than they went in." She patted his cheek again, twice, hard enough to sting. "You included." She went away down the gallery humming something, and Draco stood among the portraits of his ancestors, with his back very straight, until the sound of her had gone entirely. Then he put his hand flat against the panelling and leaned on it for a moment, and his breath came out of him in a way that had nothing dignified about it at all. He gave her the letter on the Sunday. It took him the better part of an hour to engineer 4 unobserved seconds. The house had a rhythm, and he had learned it as a child. The elves' turning of the fires at 4, the 10 minutes when the hall was empty because the guard changed at the gates, the fact that his father took the small stair and never the great one. He waited on the landing with a stack of books he did not need, and when she came up from the library, he stepped into her path and let the top 3 slide off and go down the stairs in a clattering avalanche. "For God's sake," he said loudly, "look where you're—" "I was walking," she snapped. "You enormous—" They both went down onto one knee for the books at the same time, close, heads nearly level, and his hand came out with the folded letter in it and pushed it flat and fast into the fold of her skirt, where her own hand was waiting, because she had understood in half a second, and her fingers closed on it, and the whole exchange took less time than a heartbeat. She did not look at him. She was still talking loudly about people who could not carry books. But as she straightened, and this he would think about for weeks afterwards, would take out and examine in the small hours like a man turning a coin. As she straightened, her free hand came up and her fingertips brushed the back of his wrist. Just the back of it. 2 fingers, dry and cold, drawn once across the bone. It was not thanks. It was not comfort. It was steadier than that. It was the touch of someone confirming a position on a map. Then she was gone up the stairs, still complaining, and Draco gathered his stupid books off the treads with his heart slamming and the skin over his wrist bone burning as though she had left something on it. That night, the line of light under the blue room's door stayed lit until nearly 4. And once he was in the corridor, he had no business being in the corridor. He heard the sound of paper being folded and unfolded and folded again. In the morning, a house elf brought him a book he had never borrowed. The elf laid it on the breakfast table beside his cup and would not raise its eyes. "Master Draco left this in the West Library, sir." "I didn't." "Master Draco left this in the West Library, sir," the elf repeated, in the flat, careful voice of a creature reciting words that had been put into its mouth. And then it went away very fast along the wall with its ears flat to its skull. Draco looked at the book for a long moment before he touched it. It was a Latin grammar, a schoolroom edition, the sort that had been printed by the 1,000 in the last century, with a cracked green spine and the ghost of some long-dead child's name scratched out on the flyleaf. Nothing in the house was less interesting. He understood immediately that this was the point, that a book had been chosen which no one at any table would look at twice, and that whoever had chosen it had thought about it carefully. He finished his tea. He read the prophet, or moved his eyes over it. He waited 19 minutes, which was as long as he could bear, and then he took the grammar upstairs and locked his door and sat down on the floor with his back against it. The paper was between pages 104 and 105. It had been torn from something else. The edge was ragged, and one corner carried a fragment of printed text. And it was very small, no bigger than the palm of his hand, and folded twice. He opened it with fingers that had gone unhelpful and slow. 6 words, no greeting, no name. If you trust me, don't save me. That was all. He read it. He turned the paper over, and the back was blank, and he turned it again, and read it a second time, and a third, and the words did not change and did not expand, and did not offer him one single thing to hold. Then he put his head back against the door and laughed. One short, ugly sound that came out of him like something dislodged, and left him with his eyes stinging and his jaw aching. Don't save me. As though he had been doing anything. As though there was some heroic intervention he was visibly straining toward and needed to be talked down from. He had sat at that table for 26 nights with his hands above the cloth. He had cut meat he did not eat while men laughed about her. He had heard her make a sound in a dark library and had not spoken. His entire conduct since the first evening had been an unbroken, immaculate performance of not saving her. And now here it was, requested in writing, as though it were a gift she was asking him for. The laugh turned into something else. He put the heel of his hand against his mouth and held it there until it stopped. He spent the next 4 days in a state he could not have described to anyone. The trouble was that the note admitted of exactly 2 readings, and they were not compatible, and he had no instrument for telling them apart. In the first reading, she had a plan. She had come into this house on purpose, or had turned her captivity into purpose, and she was working, and any movement from him, any warning, any smuggled wand, any half-clever act of gallantry, would put a boot through it. In that reading, "Don't save me" meant "don't ruin it," and the 6 words were the highest compliment anyone had ever paid him, because they assumed he was capable of restraint, and capable of belief, and capable of being told a thing once. In the second reading, she had nothing at all. She was a girl in a green dress at a monster's right hand, and she had worked out that he was watching her, and she had understood what a Malfoy attempting a rescue would actually amount to. A boy with an unsteady wand and a mother to lose, blundering into it, getting them both killed, and the Weasley child's letter found on her body. In that reading, "Don't save me" meant "don't make it worse," and it was not a compliment at all. It was a woman moving the only piece she had left off the board, so that when the end came, at least it would not come faster. He could not tell. He turned the paper over in his fingers until the folds went soft and furred, and he had to stop touching it for fear of wearing it through. And there was a third thing, which he did not admit for 2 days, and then admitted at 3 in the morning with a kind of exhausted disgust, that both readings frightened him less than the fact of the note itself, because she had written it. Out of everyone in that house, out of everyone alive, she had chosen to reach across the space between them and put something in his hands. and she had done it in a language of trust. If you trust me. As though trust were a thing that could reasonably be expected to exist between Hermione Granger and the boy who had watched Bellatrix Lestrange carve a word into her arm on that drawing-room floor. He had watched that. He had stood by the mantelpiece and watched it, and had not moved. She knew that. She had been on the floor. She had seen his shoes, and she had still written to him. That was the thing that got underneath. That was the thing that woke him at 4 with his heart going. Not the danger, the address. On the 5th day, the Dark Lord went north, and the house exhaled, and Draco found her in the orchard. It was the first fair evening in a fortnight. The rain had gone off toward the coast and left everything dripping and greenly luminous, and the apple trees stood in their crooked rows, with the light coming low and level through the leaves. She was walking the outer row with her hands behind her back, and she was alone, and there was nobody at the windows of the house, because the house was drinking. He came down the slope without deciding to. He had, in fact, decided very firmly not to, twice on the stairs. She heard him at 10 paces and did not turn. "You shouldn't be out here," she said. "It's my orchard." "That isn't what I meant." He stopped 6 feet behind her. The grass was soaking. He could feel it coming through the seams of his shoes. Somewhere in the hedge, a blackbird was going through its evening racket, absurdly loud, absurdly ordinary. "I got your book," he said. Her shoulders altered. It was not a flinch. It was smaller and more controlled than that, a minute reorganization of a body preparing to hold still under pressure. "Then you know what it says. 6 words. His voice came out low and much rougher than he had intended. 6 words, Granger. You had a whole page. I had 30 seconds and 1 candle. You had a page. And what would I have put on it?" She turned round then. In the low light, her face was tired in a way that the candlelight of the dining room had been hiding. There were bruise-coloured half-moons under her eyes, and a fine, papery dryness at her lips. And he understood that she was sleeping about as much as he was, which was to say, not at all. "Go on. Tell me what I should have written. A schedule? Names? A neat little account of what I'm doing here, so that it's sitting in your handwriting in your bedroom, in this house, when he comes back and looks at you." "He doesn't look at me. He looks at nothing else." She said it flatly. "He said the word mistress to your face, Malfoy. He said it to the room, and he watched you." The blackbird stopped. The silence afterwards had a physical size to it. "Yes," Draco said. "Yes." Her mouth did something bitter. "So no, you don't get a page. You get 6 words, and the 6 words are the whole of it. And I'm not going to stand in an orchard explaining myself to you, because the explanation is the only thing I have, and it is not mine. It belongs to about 40 people who are still alive." "Then why write at all?" It came out of him too fast and too loud. He got his voice down. "Why write to me? Why not burn it? Why not sit in that room and say nothing to anybody? Why give me 6 words that do nothing except—" He stopped. "Except what?" she said. "Nothing. No, say it. Except make it worse." The words tore out. "Do you know what I've been doing for 4 days? I've been holding a piece of paper and trying to work out whether you're clever or finished. Whether I'm being trusted or managed. You've given me exactly enough to make it unbearable, and not 1 syllable more. And I can't ask you, and I can't check, and there is no one on this earth I can say your name to." The light had gone amber. It caught along the side of her face and in the loose hair at her temple, and she looked at him for a long moment with an expression he could not read at all. Then she said, quite quietly, "Which do you think it is?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." She took a step. The wet grass made no sound. "You've decided. You decided about 11 seconds after you opened it, and you've spent 4 days trying to talk yourself out of it, because if you're right, it means you have to stand still and do nothing while it happens, and that's harder than dying, and you know it is." Another step. Close now. Close enough that he could see the pulse going in her throat, quicker than her voice. "So, which is it, Malfoy?" He could not get any air. "You have a plan," he said. "Say the rest." "You have a plan, and you came here on purpose." Something moved through her face, relief or grief or both, gone in an instant. "Then you know what to do," she said. "Nothing. Nothing." She held his eyes. "For as long as it takes, whatever you see, whatever they say at that table, whatever they do to me in front of you, and they will, eventually, because he'll get bored of the whisper and want the sound. You sit there with your hands where your mother taught you to keep them, and you do nothing, and that is how you help me." "Granger!" "Say you can." He couldn't speak, and then her hand came up, hesitated an inch from his sleeve, the fingers actually trembling for the first time since she had walked into his house, and closed around his wrist. Her fingers were cold. That was the first fact, and it arrived with a clarity that shoved everything else out of his head. That she was cold, that she had been walking in a wet orchard in a dress made for a warmer woman, that the bones of her hand were near enough to the surface to be counted. The second fact was that she was holding on, not gripping, holding, the way you hold a rail on a moving stair, absently and absolutely, because the alternative is to fall. Her thumb had come to rest in the hollow above his wrist bone where the pulse was, and his pulse was making a fool of him there, hammering away like something trying to get out through the skin, and she must have felt every beat of it, and she did not let go. "Say you can," she said again. "That isn't a fair thing to ask." "No. You're asking me to watch." "Yes. You're asking me to sit at that table." His voice cracked in the middle, and he hated it, hated the thin adolescent break in it. "You're asking me to sit there while my aunt does whatever she is eventually going to do and put my hands flat and chew." "Yes." Her eyes did not move off his. "That is exactly what I'm asking." "Why should I?" "Because I'll be dead in a week if you don't." The blackbird started up again somewhere behind them, obscene in its cheerfulness. A drop of water came off a leaf and struck the back of his neck, and he did not move. "You could tell me," he said. "One thing. Any one thing. Give me something to hold." "I can't." "You could. You've decided not to." Something raw and childish rose in him, and he could not stop it. "You'd rather I sat in the dark with 6 words." Her jaw tightened. For a second, the hand on his wrist went hard, almost painful, and then deliberately loosened again. "Listen to me," she said, and her voice had gone very low and very fast. "You will be in a room with him. Perhaps not this week, perhaps not next. But you will be in a room with him, and he will look at you, and you have a shield about as thick as a soap bubble, because your aunt taught you, and your aunt is a lunatic who thinks occlumency is a mood. Her fingers pressed. Everything you know, he can have. So the kindest thing I can do, the only kind thing I have left to give you, is to make sure there is nothing in your head worth taking. Do you understand me? The gap in your knowledge is not a punishment. It is the only protection I can put on you. He stared at her. He had spent 4 days constructing elaborate architectures of doubt, and she had knocked the whole thing over in 9 sentences, and what was left standing underneath was so simple that it made his chest hurt. She was protecting him. Nobody had done that. Not once. Not since he was small enough to be carried. His mother protected him the way you protect a vase, by keeping it away from edges. This was different. This was a woman standing in a wet field, holding his wrist, deliberately impoverishing herself so that a boy who had watched her bleed on a drawing room floor would have less to give up under torture. "Granger," he said, "don't." Her mouth had begun to shake very slightly at one corner, and she stopped it. "Don't say anything decent to me. I can't carry it and do this at the same time." "I wasn't going to say anything decent. You were about to." "I was about to be sick," he said, "which is different." And to his own astonishment, something happened in her face. A flicker, quickly suppressed, that on any other evening in any other life would have been the beginning of a laugh. She let go of his wrist. The place where her fingers had been went cold instantly, and stayed cold, and he was aware of it for hours afterwards, the way you remain aware of a burn. 6 weeks, she said. Maybe 7. Then it will be finished, one way or the other. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you hate me, she said. Loudly, in corridors, where they can hear you. She was already turning, already walking, the hem of the green dress dragging dark through the soaking grass. You've had practice. He hated her beautifully. It became, over the following weeks, the most skillful piece of work he had ever done. He sneered at her across the breakfast things. He said her blood status in the gun room in a voice that made Roll laugh and clap him on the back with a hand like a side of beef. And then he went upstairs and stood over a basin for 4 minutes without being sick. When she came into a room, he left it ostentatiously with a face like a closed door. When Selwyn's wife made a remark at the card table, one of the delicate ones, the ones with a small dry smile, Draco produced a colder and better one, and everyone enjoyed it, and Hermione Granger sat 2 chairs away and dealt her hand and did not look up. He got very good at it. That was the part that frightened him at night. He got good at it, and he began to understand that the boy who had done this for real at 14 had not been a different person, only a less useful one. And it worked. He could see it working. Bellatrix stopped watching him in the gallery. His father, who had for some weeks been observing his son with a kind of exhausted anxiety, began to relax by half a degree. The house recategorized him. Draco Malfoy loathed the mudblood, which was correct, which was in order, which required no further thought. Only 2 people in Malfoy Manor knew what he was doing, and one of them was pretending as hard as he was, and the other one was the Dark Lord. Draco was almost certain of that. There was no evidence. There was only the way those red eyes rested on him twice a week, with the mild, patient interest of a man watching a kettle come slowly to the boil. The test came on the 9th of August. He knew it was a test before it began, which was the horror of it. He had 10 seconds of foreknowledge and used them for nothing. They were at the table. It was late. The candles had burned down to their stubs, and the wax had gone over the rims of the sconces in long yellow tongues. There had been news from Devon that afternoon, and it had not been good, and the room had that particular gluey silence that follows failure in a house where failure is not permitted. "Bellatrix," said Voldemort. "My lord. Our guest has been with us since May." "Yes, my lord." Bellatrix's chin came up like a hound's. "You believe she should be questioned?" "I believe," said Bellatrix, and her voice climbed, delighted, "that she was in a tent with Potter for 4 months, and there isn't a thing in her head that isn't ours by right." "I have decided," Voldemort said, "that you may ask her one question." The room came alive. Draco felt it go through the table like current through wire. The small movements, the leaning, the wet sound of roll shifting his weight. Beside him, his mother's hand went perfectly still on the stem of her glass. "And if she declines to answer," Voldemort said, "you may persuade her, once." Hermione did not move. She sat at his right hand with her fingers laced on the cloth and her face composed and utterly empty, and Draco, 4 feet down the table on the opposite side, looked at the softening pear in the fruit bowl and put both hands flat on the tablecloth. "Draco," said Voldemort. The whole room turned. "My lord, you are quiet this evening." "I am always quiet, my lord." "You are." A pause. The candles hissed. "Your aunt tells me you have developed a great dislike of our guest." Draco's throat had closed. He opened it by force. "I don't like sharing my house." "No." Something moved on that ruined face that might have been amusement in a man who had ever had any. "Then you shall assist her. Bellatrix, let the boy hold her." There was a silence in which Draco heard his own blood. "My lord," Bellatrix began, "I hardly need—" "Let the boy hold her." He got up. His legs took him around the end of the table and down the long side, and he was not conscious of instructing them. Someone had pushed a chair back into the open floor. Hermione rose without being told and walked to it and sat down and arranged her skirt, and Draco came and stood behind the chair and put his hands on her shoulders. She was so warm. He had not expected that. He had touched her wrist in a cold orchard and had built some idea of her out of it. And now under his palms there was warmth coming up through wool, and the small live shift of breathing, and the hard architecture of her collarbone under his thumbs. "Don't save me." Bellatrix came round in front with her wand hanging from her fingers and her head tilted. "One question," she said, savouring it. "One little question, Poppet. Where is Harry Potter?" Hermione said nothing. "Where is he?" Nothing. Her shoulders under his hands did not tremble. His own hands did. "Well," said Bellatrix, and her voice went soft and fond and terrible. "Crucio." The body under his palms convulsed. He held on. That was all he did, and all he was permitted to do, and it went on for 4 seconds, and then 6, and then longer than anything he had ever endured. The arching, the sound she made through a jaw she had locked shut, the appalling strength in a small frame trying to get away from what was inside it. And Draco Malfoy stood behind the chair and held her shoulders down and looked at a candle stub and did nothing, 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 while his eyes ran and his knuckles went the colour of bone. Then it stopped. She sagged forward. His hands stayed where they were, and beneath the ringing in his ears, he heard the room breathing, and Bellatrix's disappointed little sigh, and the Dark Lord saying something about patience. And under his right palm, quite distinctly, Hermione Granger's hand came up off her lap, found his fingers, and squeezed once. He did not remember getting up the stairs. There was the table, and the sound of chairs, and his mother's hand closing briefly on his elbow in the doorway, a grip so hard it left marks he would find the next morning. And then there was his own room, and the basin, and a long stretch of time he could not account for afterwards. When it was over, he sat on the floor with his back to the washstand and his shirt cuffs wet and looked at his hands. They had done that. These hands, these specific hands with his grandfather's ring on the middle finger, had pressed a girl's shoulders into a chair while she was tortured. Nothing in the world could take that back. He could survive the war. He could win it. He could live to 80 and do 100 decent things. And it would still have happened. There would still be a version of him standing behind that chair forever, with his eyes on a candle stub. And she had squeezed his hand. That was the part he could not hold. That was the part that undid him completely, sitting on the cold tiles at 2 a.m. That at the bottom of that, at the very floor of what a person could be put through, she had come up out of it and found his fingers and reassured him. He did not sleep. Toward dawn, he stopped trying and went and stood at the window and watched the light come grey and thin over the orchard. And somewhere in that hour, without ceremony, something in him finished turning over. He had spent 3 months asking himself whether he believed her. Wrong question. He saw that now with the flat clarity that comes to the truly exhausted. The question was never whether she had a plan. The question was what he was going to do with the belief. And the answer she had given him, nothing, was not actually an answer, because there was more than one way to do nothing. There was the nothing of standing still, and there was the other kind, the kind nobody notices, the kind that leaves no fingerprints and asks no permission and never, ever announces itself. He began the following week, and he began small. The house had a memory, and he was its heir. Nobody living knew Malfoy Manor better than Draco did. Not his father, who had inherited it and never explored it. Not Bellatrix, who was a guest with delusions. Certainly not the Dark Lord, who moved through it like weather. Draco had been a solitary and unhappy child in a very large building. He had spent whole winters mapping it. So, the door at the end of the east corridor, the one that gave onto the servants' stair, and had been locked since his grandmother's death. He unlocked it on a Tuesday afternoon with a charm his mother had taught him for a jewel case, and left it unlocked and said nothing to anybody. 3 days later, he passed it and found it standing an inch ajar. The library ladder, which was charmed to refuse anyone not of the blood, and which put a person within reach of the high north shelves where the 17th century warding manuals lived. He spent an evening with it and a great deal of swearing, and rewrote the keying so that it would answer to any hand at all. He told himself this was reckless. He did it anyway. The following Monday, the ladder had been moved 40 feet along the rail, and there were 2 gaps in the north shelf. The elves. This was the finest work, and it took him 11 days. Malfoy elves were bound to answer summons in a strict order of precedence, and any elf attending the guest in the blue room was required to report the fact, not to Draco, but to the head of the household, which was still, on paper, his father. Draco went to his father's study on a night when Lucius had been drinking and mentioned idly, in the course of a conversation about nothing, that the reporting arrangement made the family look like servants of a rumour, that it implied the Dark Lord did not trust Malfoys to keep their own house, that people would talk. Lucius rescinded the requirement the next morning, in a fury, with the air of a man asserting something. After that, Hermione Granger could summon a house elf at any hour, and no record of it went anywhere. He never told her about any of it. That was the discipline, and it was harder than the standing still had ever been, because he wanted, with a hunger that shamed him, for her to know, to look at him across the breakfast table and understand. He kept his face shut and said something vile about her hair in the hearing of 2 Death Eaters, and went upstairs and stood at the window with his fists against the sill. And she never said a word either, but she began, once or twice a week, to leave a book in the wrong place. Not a message, nothing so crude, just a volume left face down on the alcove chair by the north window where nobody sat but him. Anchorage and Inheritance, the binding of structures to blood, left open, left at a page. The first time he read it and understood nothing. The 4th time, in the 3rd week of September, he read it and understood everything, and had to put it down and walk twice round the room, because the house was warded to the family. That was the ordinary arrangement, and it was why she could not walk out of the gates. But the passage she had left him open concerned a subtlety of the old law, that a bloodline ward does not recognize ownership. It recognizes welcome. A structure bound to a family will admit and release anyone whom a member of that family, standing within the boundary, has consciously and repeatedly received as a guest, not declared, received, in practice, in 100 small unrecorded acts, unlocking a door for someone, rekeying a ladder to their hand, removing a watch from their movements. Oh, he thought, standing in the middle of the library with his heart going. Oh, you appalling woman. She had not been asking him to do nothing. She had never once been asking him to do nothing. She had been waiting for 4 months with the patience of a stone for him to work out what he was for. He found her that night in the orchard. It was the last warm evening of the year, the air full of the sweet cidery rot of windfalls, and she was standing at the end of the outer row with her arms wrapped round herself, and she did not startle when he came up beside her. "I've read it," he said. She let out a breath. It went on a long time, as though she had been holding it since May. "How long?" he said. "Since the 2nd week." Her voice was not quite steady. "It's in your grandfather's ledger. I found the boundary clause in June, and I've been—" She stopped. "It needs 60 acts, 60 distinct, freely willed receptions, and they have to be yours. They can't be your mother's. She's a black by blood and married in, and the ward reads her differently. It had to be you. It was only ever going to be you. You could have told me. I've told you now. You could have told me in May. You'd have done it for the wrong reason in May." She turned to face him. In the failing light, she looked hollowed out, and there was a tremor going through her that had nothing to do with cold. "You'd have done it to save me. And when he looked into you, that would have been the shape of it in your head. I am rescuing her. And he'd have seen it in 9 seconds, because that's a loud thought, Malfoy. That's a thought with edges. But a boy unlocking a door in his own house because he's bored and it's his door? Her mouth twisted. That's nothing. That's noise. That's not even a thought. He stared at her. You made me unbearable to myself, he said slowly. On purpose. For 4 months. Yes. You let me stand behind that chair. Yes. It came out of her like something torn. Yes, I did. And I do it again. And I have thought about your face every single night since. And I will think about it for the rest of my life. Do you imagine I enjoyed it? Do you think there was 1 second of it I wanted? She had begun to shake in earnest now, the whole small frame of her, months of held stillness coming apart all at once. You held on to me. That's what I remember, not the pain. Your hands were shaking so hard I could feel it in my teeth, and you didn't let go. And I thought, God help him. He's actually going to do it. He's going to stand there and let me... Her voice went. She put her hand over her mouth, and Draco Malfoy, who had spent 4 months learning not to move, moved. He did not think about it. He reached out and took her by the shoulders, the same shoulders, the exact same place, and he felt the wrongness of it and did it anyway, and pulled her in, and she came all at once with a graceless, collapsing suddenness that told him she had been waiting to be allowed to for a very long time. She was rigid for perhaps 2 seconds. Then her hands came up and fisted in the back of his coat, and she pressed her face into his shoulder, and Draco stood in his own ruined orchard with his cheek against her hair and his eyes shut and held on. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say that would not have made it smaller. He could feel her breathing going ragged, and then, slowly, steadying, and the smell of her hair was rain and dust and old paper, and the light went out of the sky by degrees, and somewhere across the lawn a door opened in the house. They both heard it. She lifted her head. Her face was 2 inches from his, and wet, and her eyes moved over him with a kind of desperate cataloguing hunger, and Draco felt his own hand come up entirely without permission and find the line of her jaw. Then the door across the lawn closed again, and she stepped back out of his arms, and the cold rushed into the space where she had been. 60 acts. He had done, by his own reckoning, 31. They went about it after that with a shared and unspoken method. And the strangest thing about those weeks, the thing Draco would remember with a kind of wonder long afterwards, was how much of it was silent. They did not meet. They did not plan. There was no whispered conference in a shadowed corridor, because a whispered conference in a shadowed corridor was precisely the sort of thing that got people killed at Malfoy Manor. Instead, there was a grammar. A book left face down on the alcove chair meant this one. A book put back proud of its neighbours by ½ an inch meant not yet, wait. If she sat at dinner with her left hand over her right, the day had gone well. Right over left meant something had gone wrong, and he should attempt nothing at all for 48 hours. He acknowledged nothing. She acknowledged nothing. Twice a week, in company, he said something about her that made men laugh, and she looked at the tablecloth, and afterwards he lay awake and catalogued the exact words. And the acts accumulated. He gave her the run of the East Wing by the simple expedient of complaining in front of his father that the closed rooms smelled and ought to be aired. And then, when the elves opened them, walking through each in turn with her behind him at a hostile distance, saying at each threshold, aloud, in a bored voice, "You may as well look at it. There's nothing worth stealing." That was 6 acts in an afternoon. The house drank them without a ripple. He gave her the run of the orchard by pointing out that a woman kept indoors looked like a prisoner, and the Dark Lord had been most particular that she was not one. He gave her the North Library and the music room that nobody had entered since he was 9, and the small stone stair to the roof, which he had shown no one, ever, and which he found afterwards he was strangely glad to have shown her. By the 3rd week of October, he had counted 54. Then Bellatrix started sleeping in the house again. She had been coming and going for months, but in the last week of October, she took the room at the end of the east corridor, chose it deliberately out of 30 available. And Draco understood the geometry the moment his mother told him, because that room's door faced the head of the stairs, and the head of the stairs was the way to the blue room. "She's not sleeping," Narcissa said. They were in the small sitting room with the door shut, and she was arranging chrysanthemums that did not need arranging, her fingers moving among the stems with a fine unsteadiness. She sits up. "Sissy," she says to me, "Sissy, doesn't it strike you that the house has got comfortable?" Draco's face did not change. He had 4 months of practice. "The house is a mausoleum." That is what I said. His mother set down a stem. She was not looking at him. She had not looked at him directly in some weeks, and he had begun to understand that this was not coldness, but a form of protection, that she had decided some time ago that there were things she preferred not to be able to see. I said, "Bella, the house is exactly as it has always been," and she said, Narcissa's hands went still. She said, "Doors that used to be locked." The clock on the mantel ticked 11 times before either of them spoke. "Mother, don't." It came out of her fast and low, and for the first time in a month she looked up, and her eyes were terrible. "Whatever it is, don't tell me. I have exactly one thing left, Draco, and it is that when he looks into me, he finds a woman who knows nothing, and I am keeping it." Her chin came up. "But you will finish it, whatever it is, quickly." She went back to the chrysanthemums. "There is a hunting party going out on the 2nd of November, she said to the flowers. "Your father, your aunt, Yaxley, 9 others. They will be gone from 10 at night until dawn." A pause. "The house will be very quiet." He had 6 acts left and 8 days. He did 4 of them in 2, recklessly, badly, and knew it. He unlocked the wine cellars and the observatory and the old nursery, and each time he heard his own voice doing the bored drawl, and each time it sounded thinner in his own ears. On the 28th, she left no book on the alcove chair. On the 29th, she left no book. On the 30th, he found her in the corridor outside the music room at 4 in the afternoon, and she went past him at a fast walk with her head down, and as she passed, she said, without moving her lips and without slowing, 3 words. She followed me. He kept walking. He got round the corner and put his back against the panelling and stood there with his heart going like an animal in a sack. The last 2 acts had to be the roof stair and the gate lodge, and the gate lodge was impossible, and so it had to be something else. And he spent the night of the 31st lying rigid in the dark, going through the entire building in his mind, room by room, the way he had as a child. He found it at 3:30. The cellars. Not the wine cellars, the other ones. The stone rooms under the north wing where prisoners were kept, where she had lain for 2 days in May with Luna Lovegood and the Wandmaker, where the walls sweated and the light came through a grating at ankle height. Nobody in the house could open those doors but a Malfoy. It was, without question, the worst thing he had ever thought of. To take her down there, to stand in that particular doorway and say the words that made her a guest in the place where she had been an object. He was going to have to ask her. He got his 4 seconds on the 1st of November on the back stair with the whole house at breakfast. "Cellars," he said. "Tonight, both remaining." She stopped dead on the step below him. He watched the understanding arrive in her face, and he watched what it cost. And it was worse than he had prepared for. A flinch that went through her entire body, the pupils blowing wide, one hand going out to the wall. "Granger, if there's another way." "There isn't." Her voice had gone to gravel. She swallowed. "There isn't. I've been through the ledger 4 times. It has to be rooms only the blood can open, and there are 2 of those left, and they're both down there." "Then I'll find something." "We have 8 days, and your aunt is sitting up at night watching the stairs, and if you find something clever, it will take a fortnight." She looked up at him. Her eyes were wet and absolutely steady, which was a combination he had come to recognize as the most frightening thing about her. "Midnight. I'll be at the north stairhead. You don't have to look at it. I'll say the words in the doorway. You needn't go in. You needn't even—" "I'll go in," she said. It went wrong at 11. The hunting party did not leave at 10. It left at 9:30, and Bellatrix Lestrange did not go with it. Draco was on the landing when he heard her voice below in the hall, telling Yaxley that she had a headache, and that headaches were for beds, and he stood in the dark with the taste of copper in his mouth, and understood that the entire thing had just been handed to chance. He waited until midnight. He went down the north stair with no light at all, one hand on the wall, and she was at the stairhead exactly as she had said she would be, a shape in the blackness, and neither of them said a word. The cellar door was iron-bound and older than the house above it. It knew him. It always had. It had opened for him at 9 years old when he had come down here on a dare and been sick with fright at the smell. He set his palm flat on it. "Come in," he said. His voice went out into the stone and came back wrong. "You're welcome here. Both rooms. Come in." The door swung. The smell that came up was exactly as he remembered. Cold stone, iron, standing water, and under it the sour animal reek of fear that had soaked into the walls over 3 centuries and would never come out. Beside him, he heard her breathing change. 59, she whispered. They went down. 6 steps, 7, the darkness total, and then the second door, the inner one. And he put his hand on it and said the words again, and this time his voice did not hold at all, and he said them anyway. "Come in. You're welcome. Come in." Something moved in the fabric of the house. He felt it in the stone under his feet and in his teeth and in the ring on his hand, a vast, slow shifting, like a sleeper turning over, and the air pressure changed, and every hair on his forearms stood up. 60, Hermione said, and her voice broke on it. And then, from the top of the stair, a light. "Draco," said Bellatrix Lestrange very softly, "what are you doing in my brother-in-law's cellars at midnight?" He did the only thing left to him. He turned, and he shoved Hermione Granger back into the dark behind him with one arm, and he stepped up onto the stair with his hands empty and open and his heart in ruins, and he began to lie. "Drinking," he said. The wand light came down 2 steps. It threw her shadow enormously up the vaulted stone, and her face beneath it was all sockets and teeth. "Drinking. In the cellars." He let his voice carry the fine, expensive petulance he had been born to. "Where the drink is. Aunt, I've been at that table every night since May listening to Roll breathe through his mouth. And if you've come down here to lecture me about it, you may as well go and fetch Father. He does it better. You're not drunk. I've barely started." She came down another step. Behind him, in the black at the foot of the stair, there was no sound at all. Not a breath, not the shift of a shoe on grit. And he understood that Hermione Granger had gone as still as something under a hawk. "Show me your hands," said Bellatrix. He held them out, empty. His wand was in his sleeve where it had been all evening, and he thanked whatever ran the world that he had not touched it. She looked at them a long moment. Then she raised the light, and it fell past him, down the last 3 steps, and lit the pale oval of a face in the dark. The silence that followed had a texture. Draco could hear water somewhere behind the wall, going drop by drop into something. "Oh," said Bellatrix. And then she laughed, a low, delighted, filthy little sound, and Draco's entire body understood what conclusion she had drawn about half a second before his mind did. "Oh," she said again, richly. "Oh, you dreadful boy." He said nothing. He could not have produced a word. "In the cellars." She came down the last steps and stood level with him, and she was smiling, and her eyes were bright and wet with a terrible sisterly warmth. "In the dark, with his. Do you know what he'll do to you? Do you have any conception?" "He hasn't touched her," Draco said. "You told me that yourself." It came out of him raw and stupid, and it was the single best thing he had ever said in his life, because it was the truth, and because it was the one grievance in the world that Bellatrix Lestrange could not resist picking up. Her smile went out. "That is not the point." "It's exactly the point." He got his chin up. He let the years of breeding do it for him, the whole cold, ornamental architecture of his upbringing. He put a name on her, and he doesn't use it. So what is she? Aunt? Because she's not his, whatever he says at the table, and she's in my house eating my food, and I have been very bored since May. For 3 seconds, he had no idea whether he was about to die. Then Bellatrix reached out and took his face in one hand, hard, thumb and fingers digging into his cheeks, and shook it once, the way you handle a puppy that has done something disgusting but funny. "You are your father's son," she said, "and he was a slut too." She let go. "Get her upstairs. If I see this again, I will tell him myself, and I will watch, nephew. Do you understand me? I will bring a chair." She went up the stair, still laughing to herself, and the light went with her. Draco stood in the black for perhaps 10 seconds. Then his legs stopped working properly, and he sat down on the cold step with a thud that jarred up his spine. A hand found his shoulder in the dark, then the side of his neck, then, unsteadily, the line of his jaw where his aunt's fingers had been, pressing gently as though checking for damage. 60, Hermione whispered. Draco, 60. It was the first time she had used his name. They had 4 days. The ward, she explained. Upstairs in the alcove by the north window at 2 in the morning, sitting on the floor with their backs against the shelves, because neither of them trusted a chair to keep them awake. The ward did not simply open. It reread the household. It took account of who belonged, slowly, the way old magic did everything. And at the end of it, there would be a night on which Hermione Granger could walk out of the front gates of Malfoy Manor, and the wards would let her go like a daughter of the house. The second, she said, before dawn. That's when it settles. And then I go. He looked at the floor. There's a thing in this house, she said. That's what I came for. That's the whole of it, and I'm going to tell you now, because after tomorrow it won't matter if you know. She drew breath. He gave your aunt something to keep, a cup. It's in her vault at Gringotts, and I have spent 5 months in this house working out which vault and what's on the door of it, and I have it now, all of it in my head. That's what I am. I'm a container. Her mouth twisted. Harry needs it. It's how we finish him. It's the only reason I let myself be taken. Let yourself. I walked into the Snatchers camp on purpose, she said. In May. It took me 11 days to find them. Draco put his head back against the shelf and shut his eyes and laughed, silently, until it hurt. You are, he said, the most frightening person I have ever met, and I live with the Dark Lord. Yes, well. Her voice had gone unsteady. There's a flaw in the plan. What? You, she said. He opened his eyes. When I go, she said, there will be one person in this house who is standing next to 60 unlocked doors, and your aunt has already seen you in a cellar, and he is not stupid, Draco. He has never once been stupid. She had begun to shake. I have had 5 months to think about this, and every version of it ends the same way, and I have not been able to find a single. Then I come with you. The words were out before he had decided anything. She stopped. She turned her head and looked at him, and in the dark of the alcove, her face was very close and utterly undefended, and he watched hope arrive in it like light coming under a door. Your mother, she said, comes too. Draco. She's a black by blood and married in, he said. The ward reads her differently. She can go out of those gates any hour she likes, and she always could. The only thing that ever kept her here was me. He found, to his astonishment, that his voice was steady. So she comes, and then there is nothing left in this house that he can use. Hermione Granger looked at him for a long moment. Then she leaned in and put her forehead against his, and stayed there, breathing, and neither of them moved for a long time. The 2nd of November came in with fog. It lay on the lawns in a flat white sheet and swallowed the hedges at 40 feet, and the house was silent because the house was drunk. There had been a celebration, some success in Somerset, and men had been carried to bed. They went at 5. Narcissa Malfoy came out of the small sitting room in a travelling cloak, with one bag and her jaw set, and she did not ask a single question. And when Hermione stepped out of the dark of the passage, the 2 women looked at one another for perhaps 2 seconds. Miss Granger, said Narcissa. Mrs. Malfoy. You will walk on my left, Narcissa said. and if we are stopped, you will say nothing at all, and I will do the talking, because I am extremely good at it." They went down the great stair. They crossed the hall, the flagstones, the fireplace, the exact spot in the drawing room beyond where a word had been carved into a girl's arm. And Draco did not look at that doorway, and neither did she. The front doors opened without a sound, 50 feet of gravel. The fog took the house behind them almost at once, so that they walked in a white nowhere with only the crunch under their feet and the black shapes of the gates resolving slowly ahead like something rising out of water. 20 feet. 10. And then, from somewhere behind and above, in a voice that was not raised at all and yet arrived inside the skull rather than the ear, "Draco." His mother's hand closed on his arm like a trap. "Go," he said. "No. Go. The gate is 9 feet, Mother. Take her and go." He turned round. The fog was moving. It came apart in a long, slow tear, and he saw the figure standing on the steps of the house with the doors open behind it, and the whole black weight of the building at its back, and Nagini pouring down the stone beside it, and the red eyes finding him across 50 feet of white air. "You have been," said Voldemort, "very industrious." Draco Malfoy took out his wand. It was the least impressive thing that had ever happened. His hand was shaking so badly that he had to grip with all 4 fingers. And he was 19, and he was standing in fog on his own front drive against the most dangerous creature that had ever drawn breath, and he did it anyway. "Mother," he said, without turning his head. "The gate." He heard the gravel. He heard the iron. He heard his mother's voice, high and cracked, saying something that was not a word. And then he heard a girl's footsteps coming back, not going, coming, fast, running. And Hermione Granger arrived at his shoulder with her chin up and her empty hands open at her sides, and stood there beside him in the white morning, refusing absolutely to leave. "Get behind the gate," Draco said. "No." "Granger." "No." 50 feet away on the steps of his house, the Dark Lord tilted his head very slightly, the way a man does when a piece of music has taken an unexpected turn. "How touching," he said. And then Hermione did something that Draco would spend years failing to describe to anyone. She did not raise a wand, because she had not held one in 5 months. She took 1 step forward, one deliberate onto the gravel between him and the steps, and she spoke, and her voice went out across the fog absolutely level. "You told them I was yours." Voldemort said nothing. 21 people at that table, she said. And then a house, and then a country. You did it because you thought it would break something, and you were right. It did. It broke a great deal. But you have never once asked yourself what it cost you. She took another step. You made me your mistress, so nobody searched me, nobody questioned me, nobody laid a finger on me for 5 months because you had forbidden it, and every door in this house opened for the woman you said was yours. The fog moved between them. I have been in your ledgers, she said. I have been in your aunt's, in her vault records, in the Lestrange correspondence, in the whole of the North Library. I know what is in that vault at Gringotts. I know what is in the others, and it is all in here. She touched her own temple, once, and in about 4 hours it will be in Harry Potter's, and there is not one thing left in this world that you can do about it, because you gave me the run of the house yourself. Nagini lifted her head off the stone. "You should have killed me in May," Hermione said. "You had me on that floor, and instead you decided you wanted a boy to suffer." Something happened in that ruined face. It was very small, a stillness, a fractional narrowing. And Draco, who had spent 18 months learning to read that face for the exact millisecond at which to kneel, saw it and understood it, and felt his stomach turn to water. It was doubt. Voldemort raised his wand. Draco did not think. He got his shoulder into her ribs and drove her sideways and down, and the green light went through the space where her head had been and struck the gatepost, and the iron came apart with a noise like the end of the world. They landed hard. He got his arm under her and hauled, and then his mother had her other arm, and the three of them went through the ruin of the gate in a scrambling heap as the second curse tore a furrow of gravel up behind them. And the moment they crossed the boundary line, the moment the fog closed over the gap, Narcissa Malfoy seized both of them by the wrist and turned on the spot, and the world folded. They came down in a field in Devon at 6:20 in the morning, in wet grass, in fog, and Draco was sick, and his mother was weeping without any sound at all, and Hermione Granger was already on her knees, searching her pockets for the coin. She found it. She pressed it in her palm, and it went warm, and she pressed it again, twice, 3 times. They waited 40 minutes. What arrived was 11 people with their wands out, and Draco stood up with his hands raised and empty, and did not move a muscle while they screamed at him, while a red-haired man he vaguely recognized put a wand into the soft place under his jaw and held it there, while his mother said in a shaking voice that they were unarmed and had come freely. And through all of it, Hermione stood in front of him with her arms spread and would not move. "Ron, Ron, look at me. Get away from him. Look at my face." Her voice cracked open. "It's me. It's still me. It was always still me, and I need you to look at my face and know it right now, because we have 4 hours, and I have got the whole of it, and if you make me argue with you, I will scream." There was a terrible silence in that field. Then a slight figure came through the line of them with his glasses fogged and his hair full of water, and Harry Potter looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face broke and reassembled. "You went in on purpose," he said. "Yes." "You didn't tell me. You'd have stopped me." "Yes," he said. "I would have." And then he crossed the wet grass and took hold of her, and she made a sound Draco had never heard from her, not in the cellar, not in a chair, not once in 5 months, and put her face into her friend's shoulder and let go. Draco stood in the field with a wand still under his jaw and watched, and found that he was smiling, which was insane, and that his eyes were running, which was worse. The rest belongs to other people's stories. There was Gringotts. There was a dragon, which Draco heard about afterwards and did not believe. There was a castle in Scotland on the 2nd of May. No, the 2nd of November. The year had rearranged itself around them. And a night of fire and a boy walking out of a forest. And at the end of it, in a great hall with the ceiling open to a sky going pale at the edges, it was finished. Draco was there. He fought at the north stair with his mother on one side, and a Ravenclaw girl on the other, who never once asked his name. And when it was over, he sat on a broken step and did not know what to do with his hands. And the whisper died. That was the thing nobody had planned and nobody had thought to want. It died in a single afternoon because Harry Potter stood up in a hall full of exhausted people and told them, in flat, plain words, exactly what Hermione Granger had done and exactly how she had done it, and what a green dress at a monster's right hand had actually been for. Draco watched the room turn. He watched 5 months of poison come out of 100 faces at once, and he watched a Weasley girl push through a crowd and take hold of Hermione and refuse to let go for 11 minutes. And he stood at the back with his arms folded and his throat aching, and did not go near. He did not go near for 6 days. She found him on the 7th. It was raining. Properly raining, the good kind, the kind that comes straight down and washes things. And he was on the viaduct above the lake, because it was the one place at Hogwarts he could be certain of being left alone. And he heard her come along the stone behind him and did not turn round. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He watched the rain go into the lake. 10,000 small silver wounds, healing instantly, over and over. "Because I held you down," he said. The rain came on. "I have thought about it," he said, "every night since August. And every night I get to the same place, which is that there is no arrangement of words, none, in any language, that gets around the fact that these hands—" He held them out in front of him, and the rain stood on them. "Did that. You can tell me it was necessary. It was necessary. That's not the same thing as absolution, and we both know it isn't." He heard her come closer. "Malfoy!" "Don't." "Draco." She was beside him now, at the parapet, close enough that he could feel the warmth coming off her arm. "May I tell you what I remember?" He said nothing. "I remember 4 seconds of pain, and then nothing at all, because it doesn't record. That's the mercy of it. The mind won't keep it." Her voice was very quiet under the rain. "And I remember your hands shaking. That's what I kept. Out of that entire night, out of 5 months in that house. That's the piece I took with me. Somebody in that room was in pain on my behalf. Do you know what that was worth?" She turned and looked up at him. "You held on. You could have let go and run and been dead by morning and made yourself feel clean. And instead, you did the hardest thing there is, which is to stay in a room where you cannot help, because leaving would have helped less. That isn't the same as—" "It's exactly the same as." Her hand came up and took his wrist, the way it had in the orchard, the thumb finding the pulse. "You want me to forgive you. I can't, because there's nothing here to forgive, and I've told you that 6 times, and you will believe me eventually, because I am extremely persistent." A breath. "But I can tell you what's true, which is that I asked a 19-year-old boy to do the most appalling thing I could think of on the strength of 6 words, and he did it, and it worked, and I am alive, and so is everyone else." The rain drummed on the old stone. 6 words, he said. 6 words. "You could have written more. I know. You could have written—" His voice was coming apart, and he let it. "1 line, Granger. 1. Something that wasn't an instruction. Do you know what I would have given for 1 line that wasn't an instruction?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I did write 1. 4 times. And I burned all 4 because if he found it, he'd have known what you were to me, and then he'd have had you instead." Draco turned round. She was standing there with her hair flat to her head, and her lashes clotted, and the rain running down her face, looking up at him. And she was not frightened, and she was not being clever, and she was not managing anything at all. "What did it say?" he said. "It said—" Her mouth trembled. "It said, the worst part of this is that you can't know how I look at you when you're not looking." Something went out of him. Whatever he had been holding up for 18 months, whatever scaffolding of survival and irony and cold good manners had been keeping a Malfoy upright, it simply gave way all at once, in the rain, on a bridge, and he reached out and took her face in both hands. She came up onto her toes to meet him. The kiss was not gentle, and it was not tidy. It was two people who had spent 5 months in a house learning to hold absolutely still, and were finished with holding still. Her hands fisted in the front of his coat and dragged him down. His palms slid back into the wet weight of her hair. She made a small broken sound against his mouth, and he answered it with one of his own. The rain went on falling, and the lake went on taking it, and neither of them noticed anything at all. When they broke apart, she did not step back. She stayed exactly where she was, forehead against his jaw, breathing hard, her fingers still knotted in his coat. "Say something," she said. "I'm thinking." "That's alarming." "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that I have spent 5 months not being allowed to look at you, and I would like to now for a considerable period without anybody at the other end of a table." She laughed. It came out wet and ruined and completely happy, and she pressed her face into his shoulder and shook with it. And Draco Malfoy stood on a bridge in the rain with his arms full and his eyes shut, and understood, with a clarity that frightened him, that he was going to be all right. They went down off the viaduct hand in hand and did not care who saw. There was a great deal still to come. The hearings in which she spoke for 40 minutes, and Harry Potter spoke for 20. The winter in which Narcissa Malfoy learned to make tea for herself and was quietly appalling at it. The letters, hundreds of them, because they were both of them people who wrote things down. The manor was given to the ministry and then to the healers, and neither Malfoy ever went back, and the cellars were filled in with stone. And in the spring, in a small flat above a bookshop in Hexham, Hermione Granger came out of the kitchen with 2 cups and found him asleep in the good chair with a Latin grammar face down on his chest, a schoolroom edition, cracked green spine, a dead child's name scratched out on the flyleaf. She stood and looked at him for a while. Then she set down the cups and knelt and put her hand over his where it lay on the cover. And when he woke, she was still there, and she was looking at him, and this time he was looking back.
So that's the end. Thank you for staying with me. I want to tell you one thing about writing this story. There is a scene in part 5. Draco stands behind her chair. He puts his hands on her shoulders, and then his aunt hurts her, and he does nothing. He just holds on. I wanted him to save her. Every part of me wanted it. Let him pull out his wand. Let him be a hero. Let it be easy. But that is not what he asked for. She asked for something much harder. She asked him to trust her, to stand still, to let her do her own work, even when it hurt to watch. And I keep thinking while I wrote, this is what love actually looks like sometimes. Not rescue, not carrying someone, just believing them. most of us do the opposite. When someone we love is in pain, we want to fix it, we want to step in, we want to take over. It feels like love, but sometimes it is just fear wearing love's clothes. Real trust is quiet, it is boring, it look like doing nothing. That is the whole story, really. 7 words on a small piece of paper. If you trust me, don't save me. He believed her, and because he believed her, they both lived. So he is the one I hope you take with you. Love someone enough to protect them. Yes, but also love them enough to let them be strong. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next story.